viewers, and welcome to a new edition of our program Africa Today. In today's edition, we are going to talk about Egypt's presidency of the Peace and Security Council in the African Union, which will be taking place in the month of February. Egypt is to assume the presidency of the Peace and Security Council. The Arab Republic of Egypt will assume the rotating presidency of the African Union Peace and Security Council on the 1st of February, which is, of course, did start on yesterday, and it did start our presidency 2026 for 1 month term at a critical time, marking by escalating security, political and developmental challenges across the African continent. The presidency comes amid complex regional and international circumstances that require enhanced cooperation and coordinated action to address these pressing issues. During its tenure, Egypt aims to enhance its effective Peace and Security Council membership, the African Union primary body responsible for maintaining stability and security. That is through a comprehensive approach focused on strengthening Africa's peace, security and governance architecture. These efforts are intended to support the conflict resolution, promote stability and advance the objectives of the African Union's Agenda 2063. Egypt's presidency will be actually guided by the core principles enshrined in the Constitutive Act of the African Union, including respect of the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of the member states, the preservation of the national institution, the non-interference in the internal affairs, and the promotion of the multilateral action within the AUF framework as means of achieving lasting security, stability and development. Indeed, a very important phase for Egypt, which is the presidency of the Peace and Security Council in the African Union. To shed more light on the issue, we are very much delighted to be joined over the phone by Ambassador Ahmed Haggag, the former president of the Organization of the African Unity. Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, sir. Ambassador Haggag, how do you see the choice of Egypt to hold the presidency of the PSC, and what would be the main task during its tenure?
This is not the first time Egypt assumed the chairmanship of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union. Egypt has always called for a creation of an organ which will deal with conflicts in Africa. Like the Security Council of the United Nations, it's composed of 15 members. There's one proviso. There is a difference between the United Nations one and the African Union one, that members are not having any veto powers. It is among the family of Africa which will deal with conflict resolution, try to mediate between the one faction or recommend to the summit of the African Union certain sanctions, and try to anticipate the rising of certain conflict between the two states, or even internal conflicts. So therefore it is an organ, a peace mediation.
Mr. Ambassador, can you please shed light on the main security, political and developmental challenges across the African continent that would be, of course, tackling throughout the presidency of Egypt in the Peace and Security Council?
It is, Egypt has always played a very prominent role. It is a champion of the integration among African countries and keeping the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of member states. Therefore, any infringing element on the territorial integrity of member states will necessitate intervention by the Peace and Security Council, either by Egypt or with Egypt and the other consorts of member states.
Indeed. How will Egypt link its strategy with the African Union 2063 agenda from your point of view, Mr. Ambassador?
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Yes, sure. How will Egypt actually link its strategy with the African Union 2063 agenda?
It is always in cooperation with other member states of the African Union through bilateral relations or during the ministerial conference or the summit, the conference of the African Union, try to convince people to have like-minded initiative in order to save the countries from the tragedy of conflicts inside their countries or between different states and each other.
Yes, indeed. Actually, during its tenure, Egypt aims to strengthen the effectiveness of the Peace and Security Council as the African Union principal mechanism for the conflict prevention, crisis management, and peace building. So actually, how can this be achieved and the tools Cairo is planning to use during our tenure?
Unfortunately, in the last few years, there is a spread of conflicts in Africa, but not only in Africa and outside the world.
Indeed.
It's very difficult to achieve any quick resolution to these interstate conflicts. So we have to deal with not only with the African Union and the Peace and Security Council, but with the United Nations, with the European Union, and all the peace-loving states who have influence on the warring factions in any conflict in order to have a united group to convince the warring faction to stop fighting.
Indeed. How would the Egyptian presidency, sir, help to promote a comprehensive approach that integrates peace, security, governance and development in line with the African Union Agenda 2030 for the sustainable development?
The chairmanship of Egypt, like any chairman of the Peace and Security Council or the African Union itself, has a responsibility to start initiating a mechanism in order to have a united African approach to a warring faction in order to stop fighting. Or otherwise, it could recommend to the chairman of the president of the African Union himself applying sanctions against the warring factions.
Indeed. Finally, Mr. Ambassador, Cairo is planning to hold separate ministerial meetings to tackle both Sudan and Somalia. So why that special care those countries have at this very critical timing, sir?
I see the response so far, either from the Security Council of the United Nations or the African Union, is lukewarm. It did not have a strong initiative in order to put an end to the fighting in Sudan or in Somalia, the Federal Republic of Somalia. Unfortunately, the Federal Republic of Somalia, there are some factions who formed and breakaway elements like the Somaliland and others, which is an infringe of the integrity of territorial integrity of Somaliland. So we have to approach not only an African approach, but also a world approach.
Indeed. Ambassador Ahmed Haggag, former president of the Organization of African Unity, thank you so much, sir, for your precious input. Always a pleasure. And moving on with our news in Africa today, where Minister of Foreign Affairs, Immigration and Egyptian expatriates Badr Abdel Ati affirmed that Egypt, in light of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi chairmanship of the ODAN, PAD Heads of State and Government Orientation Committee, it gives special priority to addressing the continental infrastructure financing gap through mobilizing investment, enhancing bankable projects, and strengthening the partnership with regional and international financial institutions.
Minister of Foreign Affairs, Immigration and Egyptian expats Badr Abdel Ati affirmed that Egypt, in light of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's chairmanship of the UDAN PAD Heads of State and Government Orientation Committee, gives a special priority to addressing the continental infrastructure financing gap through mobilizing investments, enhancing bankable projects, and strengthening partnerships with regional and international financial institutions. Abdel Ghouti made the remarks during his participation upon President Sisi's directives in the high-level virtual meeting of the Presidential Infrastructure Champion Initiative to Africa, chaired by South Africa President Ramaphosa, with the participation of a number of African heads of state and government, senior African officials, and the Chief Executive Officer of the African Union Development Agency, the NEPAD. Abdel Ghouti highlighted the ongoing efforts to study the feasibility of establishing an African Development Fund as a potential additional mechanism to support financing for priority projects, stressing Egypt's continued exchange of expertise and provision of capacity-building programs for African countries, particularly through the Egyptian Agency of Partnership for Development and the NEPAD agency. At the outset of his speech, Minister Abdel Ghouti conveyed President Sisi's greeting to the participating leaders, expressing Egypt's appreciation for President Ramaphosa's leadership of the initiative. He commended the role played by the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, and the Secretariat of the Presidential Initiative in developing infrastructure and achieving development and continental integration, emphasizing that the initiative reflects the firm conviction that infrastructure development is a fundamental pillar for achieving economic growth, enhancing regional integration, and supporting resilience, thereby contributing to the implementation of the African Union's Agenda 2063.
And the Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ghouti and Nigerian Foreign Minister Yusuf Tugar discussed strengthening bilateral ties and regional security in a phone conversation.
Foreign Minister Badr Abdel Ghouti and Nigerian Foreign Minister Yusuf Tugar discussed strengthening bilateral ties and regional security in a telephone call. Ministry spokesperson Ambassador Tamim Khalaf said Abdel Ghouti reaffirmed Egypt's support for efforts to eliminate terrorist organizations in Central and West Africa and the Sahel. Abdel Ghouti expressed Egypt's readiness to share its counter-terrorism expertise with Nigerian national institutions. The two ministers also discussed enhancing economic and investment cooperation, especially through Egypt's membership in COMESA and Nigeria's membership in ECOWAS. They noted potential collaboration in infrastructure, renewable energy, and pharmaceuticals, aligning with Nigeria's national development plans. Regarding the upcoming African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, the ministers agreed to maintain coordination with regional economic communities. On the situation in Gaza, Abdel Ghouti reiterated that the need for international support for the second phase of the United States ceasefire plan. He called for the establishment of the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza as transitional body to manage daily affairs until the Palestinian Authority can resume its functions. He also emphasized the necessity of an international stabilization force to monitor the ceasefire and facilitate reconstruction. The ministers concluded by pledging continued coordination to support the goals of the African Union Agenda 2063.
And with that, our dear viewers, we come to the end of this edition of our program Africa Today. Many thanks for watching.